Hi, everyone. My name is Tyler Olsson. I am one of your hosts and the creative director at REIMAGINE. You are tuned in to REIMAGINE 2020 V2, that is to say, version 2. Our first event was held in May, and we had the pleasure to speak with some of our industry partners and showcase some of what they were doing by way of innovation and building out this emerging and exciting industry. We also had the opportunity to chat with and showcase some of our student members at MouseBelt University, which, by the way, MouseBelt is one of the teams behind REIMAGINE virtual events next to multi.io, cryptocurrency exchange. So when I refer to students that we had acquired, I mean to say students that we had acquired at MouseBelt University. So not only did we have the chance at REIMAGINE version 1 to talk with our industry partners, but we also had the opportunity to chat with some of the students that we had acquired in the past 2 years. And they came to us after we had made an effort to sort of reach out to students at major institutions who were interested and eager about learning about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, but maybe didn't have the kind of institutional support structures that they needed in order to study these technologies in a systematic way. Joining me right now to talk a little bit about some other opportunities that such students could get involved with on top of anybody else that is developing in this space is Tyler van der Hoeven, who is an ecosystem evangelist at the Stellar Development Foundation. And as I mentioned, he's going to be telling us a little bit about the Stellar Community Fund. But before we get there, I think it's right to stick to the tradition of hearing a little bit of testimonial from the guests that we bring on. And this is in large part because many people flock to the cryptocurrency and blockchain space for many different reasons. So you have a wide variety of profile types. And I think that because this is something that has the potential to profoundly change the way that society is structured, both at the economic, the political, and the financial levels, I think it's good for all of those people who may not quite be totally convinced to hear some of the stories from those people in the space. So, Tyler, how are you doing? How are things in your neck of the woods?
I'm doing fantastic. My neck of the woods is pretty great at the moment. I live in Tennessee, so right in the middle of the mountains here. Live with my wife and child. So we're having the time of our lives. Recently actually joined the Stellar Development Foundation back in November. Before that, I had just kind of been on the fringes, actually competing in some of the funds that we'll talk about in a minute. If we go way back to kind of how I made my foray into software development and engineering and eventually finance, you'll find me on a tractor in a farm. So I was a farmer for a number of years. I've actually been a farmer longer than I've been a programmer. So fun little fact, I guess it won't be true for too much longer, but I was a farmer for a long time, picking apples, planting pumpkins, doing lots of farmers markets. But farming is kind of a cyclical thing. So during the winter, you don't have a lot of work, and you start getting old enough, start wanting to move out of the house. And eventually you're like, okay, I kind of need money to be flowing in all year long. So I started looking to other things to do. And so one winter rolled around and I taught myself how to program. Went on Treehouse and just took a bunch of classes, hours and hours and hours of this thing. My parents were kind of worried because I'm buried in the basement on my computer at all hours of the night. But eventually I pop out of that. I have a little LLC, little company that I founded to do freelance programming. Had no idea what I was doing, but I did know how to Google. So Google helped me land some initial freelance work, did that for a little while. One of my clients hired me full time about a year into it. So I was doing front-end development for a company doing business analytics. So I was kind of getting familiar with business and money management, starting companies. We were working with a lot of startups, and we were a SaaS analytics company. So dealing with a lot of folks that are kind of getting started and trying to figure out how to make money online. And it was super fascinating to me because most of our cancellations for our own software, our company was a software as a service, and most of our companies are canceling because they just can't figure out how to make money. They've got a good idea, they enjoy what they're doing, but they just can't figure out how to convert. You've got this problem where these developers are building something cool, but they don't know how to market themselves, or they don't know how to kind of get that first injection of cash. So a lot of people try and get VC funding, but they're not focusing on their customers. So their product is suffering because they don't, it's a tricky situation. And so I'm dealing with a lot of those customers, but I'm also kind of a serial entrepreneur. So I'm building a lot of my own stuff on the side and finding the same problems as I start to scale things or build things. And, you know, a handful of people like them, but you reach this point pretty quick where it's a little bit too expensive for me to do this without charging money, but I don't know how much to charge. I don't know, like, how am I going to get this thing started? I need to hire somebody else, but I definitely don't have the money. And there's this gap kind of in between where you're creating something, you're building something, you enjoy what you're doing, but you can't quite make the jump to either working on it full time or figuring out how to kind of make the jump towards profitability. And that's what our company was doing a lot. Barometrics, that was the company I was working for. They were kind of pushing for that, filling in that gap. And it's still tricky. It's difficult. You can only write so many blog posts before you just need money. But it's that question of where does that come from? And so I'm in that same boat, like I mentioned, trying to figure out how to make money from these side projects. And I enjoy doing all these things and building little startups and little apps and trying to sell them or launch them on Product Hunt and stuff. But as I couldn't make money, and they still, you know, to keep something up, keep servers alive, it costs money. So I'm starting to transition, starting to shift and look around for, are there opportunities outside of just straight up asking for VC money or going through that whole process? I don't really want to move to California to do a Y Combinator. I want to find some other way to fund these fun projects. I'm not looking to like jump into this full time yet. So I actually found, at the time it was called the Stellar Build Challenge. I had been a little bit familiar with cryptocurrency, just on the fringes, had done a little trading with Bitcoin, was familiar with Ethereum. Wasn't super interested in it at the time. It wasn't a wow thing for me. It was more just like, this is kind of interesting. We'll see where it goes. But I ran across Stellar. I was Stripe, a payment processor. I was very familiar with them, and they had made an early investment into the Stellar Development Foundation. So I had become familiar with Stellar through Stripe. And they had just launched about a year ago a Stellar Build Challenge where they were offering some of their tokens for building on their platform. And so there weren't a ton of developers building on the platform at the time, but this was an injection model for them to kind of get new developers interested in trying things out. And so I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is a fascinating technology. It's aligned with finance, and it gives me opportunity to build something relatively quickly, but kind of get paid for it. So I entered and I won. The first one that I entered, I created a little application called Popcoin, which was like micro payments for API calls. So as you make API calls to like Netflix or a magazine subscription or something, it could charge you per API call. So you could very fine tune and say, this particular API call costs X amount, so we're going to charge this amount. So you could kind of, a user or a client would fill up their account with a certain number of these tokens. And then as you made API calls, their token balance would drain. And then once it hits a certain bottom threshold, we get an email to say, hey, you need to pay for more tokens. Kind of similar to like a Twilio model with the SMS messaging, right? Where you have a certain amount of balance, and then as you make these API calls, it drains your balance. So this was kind of an API service that you could plug into anything that you were building and kind of have a payment model with microtransactions. So I won with that entry. The next time I was like, oh, it was cool. I was neat to win. And I finally had made some money and didn't have to give away my project and had built something that I really enjoyed. The next one was a game. I built a little color glyph, which is a little pixel glyph creation and trading game that won as well. And all of a sudden, like, it's starting to like, wow, I can get paid for something, to build something, to give myself like a cash injection for the things I'm building relatively quickly. Like it's not guaranteed, obviously, but if you apply yourself and you really try and implement this technology and care about what you're doing and are actually trying to build something, there's a real opportunity to make money here. to get paid to have that initial cash injection to keep it going. And that's what I did. So I kept building these things, kept entering competitions, and kept this cycle going of entering, winning, kind of having this enough money to keep going on to the next thing. Whether a lot of these projects that I built, I ended up selling and then just moving on to the next thing. And that was really cool to me, that there was this opportunity out there where if you had an idea, you could get paid to build. If you had something, in this case, financial directed, where you wanted some financial service, you wanted to implement some new financial service in your app, there was an opportunity to get paid for it. So I kept going along with that for a number of years. And then just last November, I won my last SCF, so Stellar Community Fund. We have that fund. It's still going on. We'll talk about some redesigns, but that was the last one that I won. I got hired at the company to be their ecosystem evangelist. At this point, I'm very deeply involved in the community, talking to people. I understand Stellar very well because, again, it's not guaranteed, it's not free money, but if you care, if you get involved, and like this technology, the company that I work for, Stellar, is just a very fascinating cryptocurrency. And it's a very interesting model that's quite different than a lot of the other ones that are out there. And as I'm getting deeper into it and becoming more fascinated with it and understanding how it works and helping people out, it just made sense to transition from kind of being on the fringes, winning competitions, to actually being on the inside. And now I'm actually designing the SCF. So kind of from the outside, competing in it, to now I'm creating it along with some of my colleagues on the ecosystem team to create the best funding mechanism out there, I believe, in the cryptocurrency space. Identifying what's the best design to get these projects funded as we look to entries that are coming in, or businesses that are coming in that want to implement new blockchain technology, or they've heard some benefits, but they're not quite sure if it makes sense, right? That's always the question. Does it make sense for us to spend engineering time on something we're not sure is going to have a guaranteed result? I can't necessarily guarantee you results. I can show you the feature set, but if you can get paid to implement this thing, if you can cover your engineering time, or you can have the funding that you need to ship that pilot, well, then what's to lose, right? So this is really what the SCF is aiming to do through the seed fund that we have, and then there's also the lab fund, which is more like a hackathon fund, which maybe we can get into some more of the details there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, that's what is so exciting about these platforms, at least for the entrepreneurial types, right? Is because they sort of take crowd sourcing and fundraising to a whole new level, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I sort of really like your narrative going from, right, you start out as a farmer, and then you sort of like want to figure out some way to have a steady flow of income beyond whatever is happening there for you seasonally. So then you sort of utilize tools like the sort of internet, maybe to kind of, take it upon yourself to teach yourself how to code. I have a lot of friends that, right, kind of abandon this notion of going to college, or they sort of abandon the merits that they achieved at their time spent in college, because they realize, like, oh no, I can go and teach myself to code, and then I sort of open up this whole new world of opportunity for me, because they see that there's such a high demand for that, right? So it's nice to see that you sort of did that for yourself. But on top of that, you didn't want to, right, be confined to the old VC models and, travel to the Bay Area and sort of do something like that. So you find these opportunities, like, for example, at Stellar, you end up winning your first submission, right? They sort of, not only do they sort of give you a little bit of monetary compensation, right, to sustain yourself, but I'm sure that does a lot for your self-confidence and for making it seem like all the work that you had put in, right, was actually worth it in the long run. And so what's so great about it is the capstone there about how you go from being a farmer to sort of teaching yourself how to code, to participating in a Stellar building a competition, you sort of win, and now you're sort of really involved in the community, right? You're sort of working with Stellar, you're sort of an evangelist, and you have now said, okay, well, how is it that I can sort of give back, right? You see that model really catalyzed your success to where you are now. So it's like, what can we do to kind of reinvent this, or maybe not reinvent it, but build upon that fundraising model and sort of make it even more accessible, more plentiful to people who might be in a similar situation like what you were before. And so I definitely want to go into sort of the details of the Stellar Community Fund that you have now. But maybe before we get there, you're at Stellar now. For those people who aren't familiar, what is Stellar? What is the protocol all about, right? How is it uniquely contributing to the larger DHT blockchain ecosystem?
Sure. So Stellar is primarily a financial product. We're software, right? So you implement software if you've got our Stellar software, if you've got financial problems that you're looking to solve. And what's different, I would say that in itself is not unique, right? That's a lot of cryptocurrencies is trying to be some sort of new financial service. What's different about Stellar is that we're not replacing anything. We're not trying to usurp the existing financial system. We're looking to connect it. And so a lot of these, there's tons of financial services out there. And a lot of them, like, people rely on them and they use them every day. And what Stellar's trying to do is connect those things. The problem is a lot of these financial services exist in isolation, where geographically it's kind of a local internet, if you will, where everybody just kind of interacts in their own ecosystem with their own currency and their own little sphere. And in the West, that sphere is pretty big, right? We can transact relatively easily, relatively anywhere. But as you start to get outside the West into less reached or less banked geographies, that becomes much less true. And the circle gets smaller and smaller, and that local internet gets tighter and tighter, where you don't have access to much outside of your own sphere. And these tend to be all geographical, like as far as my feet can walk type barriers. What Stellar's aiming to do is make those connections to bring that internet connectivity where you don't need to be limited. There's no real reason to be limited in your financial access to only as far as your feet can walk, right? All of these things are digital. They exist on computers. And once you connect those things together, once these databases can talk to each other, you have this access, this connectivity, which allows money and value really to be transferred anywhere, to move from place to place to place very quickly and very cheaply. And so that's really what Stellar is trying to do. Is it's not its own currency. It's not its own base asset. It has similar, maybe in some respects, to Ethereum, where you have ETH, which provides the gas cost. We have XLM, Lumens, which provide the transaction fees for things to move around, the gasoline for things to move around. But you have assets. You just tokenize things, other assets, other stable coins, other currencies, other real estate and securities and stocks and bonds. You tokenize these stores of value, and then because they're connected to the Stellar network, they're transactable all over the world. You have that connectivity where everything's pieced together, everything has a line to it. And once you have that, everything can begin to move, and you can transact all over the world without being limited to only as far as your feet can walk. And that only unlocks economic potential for those that don't have it, but it also unlocks economic potential for people who are building products and services where I might have been limited to, like, do you have Stripe access? Do you have a PayPal account? Well, now it doesn't matter. So long as you've got a route in your country, a bank that's tapped into the Stellar network, there's a path from me to you where our value can move between each other. And that's really powerful, and that's really interesting and really neat to have that capability and to be working on something that's that transformative, to where it's working with things that already exist rather than trying to replace it. Because if you're in the replacing game, you're just kind of working by yourself, and somebody else is going to replace you. They're going to do it faster and cheaper. But if you work with other people and you connect with other services and institutions, everybody's working together, and you're just a piece in the bigger puzzle. It's a very important piece. It's a very critically important piece, but everybody's kind of working together at the same goal of financial inclusion for everybody in the world. And being able to be a part of that is phenomenal. It's fantastic. Being able to talk with and work with tons and tons and tons of smart people who don't directly work at SDF, but are working on the same sorts of goals that we are, and being able to partner with them makes the team and the goal much bigger and achievable.
Awesome. So maybe now we're in a position to have you tell us a little bit about the Stellar Community Fund. What is it that you're trying to fund? Who are you trying to fund? What kinds of projects are you looking to fund, hopefully, or is it just kind of open, fair game?
It is open and fair game. So the Stellar Community Fund has a bit of a history, which I'll spare you too many of the details, but ultimately it boils down to it's a continuously iterating program where it's getting better and better all the time. And we are launching here in August a brand new update, the SCF 2.0, right? Stellar Community Fund 2.0. We've been doing this for 5 rounds. This will be our 6th round technically. And in this round, we're taking what we have, which is a single fund just for any project to enter. And there's 12 million lumens that get split up between 8 different projects. We're changing that to be now 2 different funds. So there's a seed fund and a lab fund. The seed fund is for serious entrepreneurial. We want to launch a business. We want to implement Stellar. We know what we're doing. We're a good, solid team. We're looking for some cash to really implement this thing, to take this thing. We're looking for out of this, like as the designer of the fund, I'm looking for these entrants, winners of this fund to last for at least a year successfully out in the wild. I want to see solid business plans for how they're going to keep this project going. So that's the seed fund, and it's going to happen twice a year, and we'll be giving away 5 million lumens in each one of those funds. Splitting that 5 million between 3 to 5 projects. So 3 to 5 winners every 2 years, splitting a pool of 5 million lumens. That's a seed fund. On the other side, we have the lab fund, and this is your hackathon fund. This is for people that just are like, I'd like to get involved in blockchain. I don't really know where to start, but it'd sure be nice to not, it would be really nice to find some place where I can really compete, where I can really test my mettle, where I have a community that I can get involved with to really learn and understand, get some feedback. And maybe if I really apply myself, if I really work hard, if I build something amazing, I can get some reward for that. So this is happening. This lab fund is happening 4 times a year. These rounds will go for about 2 months apiece with a month break in between. And we're going to be picking probably about 12 projects. So out of all the entrants that come in, 12 projects will make it into what we call the final round. And this will be a prize pool of about 500,000 lumens. And so 12 projects will be splitting a pool of 500,000 lumens. So I've talked a little bit about the organization, the structure, and the 2 different funds, but there's also this, we pick 12 projects in a final round. So there's the next phase of this piece of this is that there's 2 kind of rounds in this for both of these funds. The first is everybody just enters. If you think like, hey, I would like to try and win the lab fund, you put in a project, you implement Stellar into something, you try some experimental crazy wild hair idea, you moonlight for a few weekends and see what comes out. You put your name in the hat, you put your project. We have a submission page where you'll put in your submission. From there, it'll go to a panel of judges. And this is both SDF employees like myself, as well as a large collection of dedicated, proven community members. So these are people that have won SBCs in the past or have been around in the community for a long time. That panel will go through all of the entrants and select from that in the seed fund, those 3 to 5, and in the lab fund, the roughly 12 projects. They'll go through, say like, oh, these ones are the strongest ones. And they'll sign off essentially on those as being the finalists for both the lab and the seed funds. And from there, it goes to a community vote. And this is, we use a fancy quadratic funding mechanism. It's called flaggable quadratic voting. It's quite fascinating, but it's essentially allows the greater WWW World Wide Web to contribute their preference towards prize allocation, right? So I have a pool in the seed fund of 5 million lumens and a pool of 500,000 lumens in the lab fund. The way that gets allocated is by popularity vote, right? So if you get 10% of the vote, you get 10% of the prize. If you get 50% of the vote, you get 50% of the prize. And so it will be important to really work on your marketing pitch and to spread the word about your project and to get the news out there if you make it into the final round, because the quadratic vote will determine how many lumens you actually get from that pool. So the panel picks the top projects, and then quadratic community vote picks your prize allocation percentage. So there's this nice little balance between making sure we get really good, solid entries in, but then the world is involved in allocating funds. It's a very interesting and unique opportunity to kind of put your project out there and see it get funded. A lot of, like, for myself, I would have loved the lab fund, and just coming back again and again and again. I've got a new idea. I want a new idea. Getting some feedback, tweaking it, approving it, having that community around you that's just like, we are the lab fund people. But then for those that are like, no, this is cool. Maybe I want a lab fund, but now like the community loves this. I feel like I've got something here. Maybe it's time to pitch to the seed fund, right? Or maybe you've already got a financial platform and you really want to try and implement blockchain, but it's like, that's a little bit of a risky move. That's going to be a lot of engineering time. Maybe make a pitch to the seed fund, right? Because then you can get that prize money to hire another engineer, or at least dedicate a year of your efforts towards really implementing this, running a pilot, seeing if it works. The two funds are very specifically designed to support these two important use cases of allocating some of the foundation's pool of funds towards actually creating and seeing projects built and funded and running and successful. They are two very different funds, but they're both very important, I think, towards supporting the ecosystem and seeing the best things come out of the community that's coming in and maturing in the Stellar ecosystem.
Great, thanks for that. Did I hear that correctly, that sort of aspect of community involvement is just unique to the lab fund as opposed to the seed fund? Or?
It's both. So on both sides you have, so from past winners, like the funds are great, but the friends seem to be the bigger reward a lot of times. I mean, I know everybody like sitting like, okay, yeah, sure, the friends we made along the way, I've heard that before. But it's actually true. Like, as somebody who's won, the funds are great, but they run out. But what doesn't run out is the relationships that you have and the people you can come back to and the people that you can talk to and ask questions about. And, hey, I'm thinking about launching this, or does this seem like a good feature to add? Those are things, like, the money's going to run out. You have to find a way to either make more or to move on to the next thing. And that's where relationships become so incredibly important. And so that's kind of built into the core of the SCF, both on the lab and the seed fund side, is both the panel who's judging a project and trying to pick those top 3 to 5 or 12-ish projects. They're talking with you. If you're under consideration, they're giving you feedback. They want to see you succeed. They have a vested interest in the success of Stellar, just like I do. And so they're talking to you and asking you questions and like, have you thought about this design? And would you consider this improvement? Or I really like this particular aspect of your project. We really hone in on that. And that happens on both the lab and the seed fund side. And then after the panel has chosen finalists, it goes to a discussion round in the actual community. So outside of the panelists, you're just out there in the community talking about your project. Like, what should I add? What is interesting? And that's where you're just going to get loads and loads of user feedback. As you're able to market your project and get it out there, you're collecting feedback to make improvements so that when it comes time for that community vote, you're well set and positioned to succeed. And that ultimately, like, those relationships you build will be the most important things that you'll bring out of the SCF. Like, if you focus on that, if you think about that, and if you make efforts. Plenty of people may come in and just really care about the money, but I think you're missing a huge part of the Stellar Community Fund, and that's the community aspect, that there's people out there who care about the same things you do, who are building things with the same code base that you are. So, like, talk to each other, talk about those problems, and try and solve things together, because you'll come out with better entries. You'll be able to come back again in the future as a stronger entrant. Those relationships are incredibly important, and things that don't like die out or get spent like the money will. Those are things that you can keep coming back to and drawing from for a long time after you win. Or even if you just compete and you don't win, you still can build relationships. You can still win in that sense.
Yeah. I was talking to Charles Hoskinson yesterday, the CEO of IOHK, and we were talking a little bit about the importance of like the peer review process, and he had sort of referred to it as an effort to create a decentralized brain, right? And sort of that's kind of what I'm hearing in what you're saying right now, right? You have people that are sort of talking to each other, right? And sort of that's all wrapped up in this decision of who's getting funded, what projects are getting funded, and that only makes sense because you want to be working together, right, to sort of like preserve the longevity of this space in general, right? Not just, right, like it's not just people sort of on the other side of the table, right? Some sort of executives who don't have any sort of skin in the game in the sense that they're, right, it's not like they're really building out a project and they're seeing the ways in which this person over here might be able to connect and sort of complement what they're building, right? It's not just executives making arbitrary decisions on what they think is hot, right? But it's actually people that are sort of in there, you know, getting their hands and their elbows dirty, right? Sort of forming relationships with each other and sort of, right, you know, taking on that decentralized sort of neuron, if you will, if we're going to run with the sort of brain analogy, right? They're sort of creating the connections so that sort of great things can come out of collaborative efforts as opposed to sort of isolation. I love it. So for everybody out there, if you're an early stage business and you have a working product, right, you can go and look at the seed fund opportunities there at the Stellar Community Fund. If you're somebody that is, you know, maybe not fully developed in your ideas, but you want to be a little bit more experimental, you can keep an ear to the ground for the lab fund opportunities. Is that right?
That's correct.
Where can people stay up to date with these announcements?
So the communityfund.stellar.org would be a fantastic place. Another one would be our Keybase channel. It's stellar.public. So if you go on a Keybase, we have our community is all on there, and that would be a great place to be directed towards wherever your efforts are going. Also to get help for applications that you have. Those would be my two big suggestions. We'll also make all our announcements on our Twitter, stellar.org. So make sure and follow us there too. Those would be the primary ones. I mean, there's definitely other places, but there's no need to flood. Those would be the best places to get the most important and up-to-date information. And then as you start to dive in more and dig in deeper, there are a plethora of more focused communities and groups. Stellar's a big thing. So, but starting kind of broad and then narrowing down would be good. But the community fund .stellar.org would be the first place I'd go, and then kind of just explore and play around with that. Would be the best place to hang out.
Awesome. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for hopping on a call with me and sharing a little bit about the your roots, where you've come from, and kind of how that figures into your now efforts to share the wealth, if you will, right, and provide opportunity to all of the innovators and entrepreneurs out there. You're tuned in to Reimagine 2020 V2, folks. We'll catch you next time.